and particularly for their generous financial support and make this conference possible. And also like to thank colleagues at the Taiwan Association of International Relations and conference organizers and staffs. The Taiwan Association of International Relations, the TAIR, was formally established in September 2007, 10 years ago, and has quickly developed into a leading organization for the study of international relations in Taiwan, with more than 400 to 500 faculty and student members across more than 30 universities and more than 40 academic departments in Taiwan. And the tremendous growth in the past decade of the TAIR and the research of international relations in Taiwan has in fact taken place in the context of Taiwan's own crucial strategic positions in the Asia Pacific. And it's a complex relations with the mainland China. And also its effort, Taiwan's effort to increase its engagement with the international community, from academic to policy ones. Of course, the cross-strait relations and Taiwan's international positions are always challenging. And however, in the recent years, Taiwan has worked out and worked hard to build a peaceful environment for the region. And thank you all for coming here to Taiwan. I know some of you took a long flight, and I hope that the weather, well, in fact, actually, just a couple of days ago, the weather was so nice. It was just like a spring. And I was a little bit disappointed and frustrated yesterday. But turned out this morning, there's no rain, and the weather report said that tomorrow will be fine. And so please find time out, except the meetings in the building, mainly taking place in the building next to us, the social science building and the poli-science building. This is the law school building. And please find time to walk around the campus. We have a huge campus here in the downtown city of Taipei, which is relatively a smaller size in terms of the major city, mega city in this part of the region. So you find it very comfortable and full of different buildings. And also, you're all invited for tonight's reception of this conference, which will take place in the next, in the social science building on the first floor. And there will be some catering and beverages and some performances as well. Hosting this conference indeed is an opportunity to further advance the study of international relations in Taiwan and interact with the leading scholars in the field from across the world. We are very much looking forward to making the most of the opportunity and to learn from you all. Finally, I wish everyone can have enjoyable and enriching stay here in Taiwan and the 5th Global International Studies Conference every success. Thank you.
Thank you, President Yang. And now we will start the morning keynote session, and it is our pleasure to have Professor Busen to be the keynote speaker for us today. And I would like to take a few seconds to introduce Professor Busen to the audience. Professor Barry Busen is the Emeritus Professor of International Relations at the London School of Economics. And he's also an honorary professor at the University of Copenhagen and Jilin University. Prior to this, he had taught in Sweden, Japan, and England, which he taught at University of Warwick and University of Westminster. Professor Busen has made tremendous influence in the domain of international relations and social science. He also has published extensively during the past 3 decades. He is currently working on a book with George Lawson on why the discipline of international relations needs to pay much more attention than it does to the global transformation to modernity that took place during the 19th century. And it is indeed our utmost honor to have him here today to be our keynote speaker. So now, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Professor Busan with our most sincere applause.
I don't think so. The moving up and forth is this?
Yeah.
If I want to move on?
Yeah. Or down.
Yeah.
Down up. Okay.
And this works. Okay. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you to the organizers for the conference and to wisc for inviting me. What I want to do this morning is to look at the question of whether we are moving into a post-Western world order. And this is a work in progress. In fact, as the introductory speaker mentioned, George Lawson and I were doing a book. We have in fact done the book, and it came out a couple of years ago. And this work, to some extent, tries to build on that and move forward. But it's quite a speculative exercise at this point. Can you hear me in the back if I'm speaking like this? No. That seems fairly decisive. Can you hear me if I speak like this? Yeah, okay, so I need to hold this close. Sorry about that. Okay. Well, what I was saying was that this work builds on the book that George Lawson and I published a couple of years ago, although since he's in the audience, I should say I'm not holding him responsible for anything that I say here today, because I'm going to try to be a little speculative, to stick my neck out a bit, and to make the case that we are indeed moving into a post-Western world order, and to try to set out the reasons why I think that, and also to set out some assumptions and some predictions, always a hazardous thing to do in international relations, as to what this order will actually look like. The paper is a bit longer than I have time for, so I'm going to skip through some of the slides, and forgive me for that if I get a bit messed up. But I'm going to look at some plausible assumptions about the future of 7 key structural features, and then move on from that to look at the implications and the outlook, as it were, that these suggest for this emerging world order. So the starting position is that global international society is in a transition, or you might even want to think it's in a crisis. But it isn't the kind of traditional crisis where there's a high expectation of a great power war or a deep economic crunch of some sort. There are lots of threats to the existing order. Clearly, the distribution of power is changing, and I'll say more about that a bit later. Clearly, the distribution of political legitimacy and cultural legitimacy is also changing, and that's an important factor in all of this. The transnational dimension, it seems, is getting bigger, stronger, more influential, a bigger part of what we think of as world politics, and that this in some ways threatens or questions some of the core principles of the existing order, particularly territoriality and sovereignty and nationalism. I think it's fair to say that capitalism is in one of its periodic crises. One of the reasons for this is a fairly traditional one of rising inequality. That's not new, but it's a periodic issue. The other one is the rising issue of unemployment, particularly that the new turns in technology seem likely to remove a lot more jobs than they replace, and therefore the traditional distribution mechanism of capitalism is somewhat under question. There's also what I would call the implosion of the Anglosphere, Brexit plus Trump, 2 rather big surprises from last year. And that seems to me to take the Anglosphere out of the leading position that it has had in the world order, for better or for worse, for the last couple of hundred years. And that, in a sense, is a rather big challenge, because it's not at all clear what is going to take the place of that kind of leadership. There are environmental challenges which are well known, and the continued relentless technological innovation, which is always producing surprises. So we're in a world which is under quite a lot of pressure in a number of different ways. This world came into being during the 19th century, and any of you who are interested in that side of the story can look at the book that George and I did a couple of years ago. And it's worth, I think, commenting that in terms of global orders, the Western-dominated one is the only one we've ever had, right? Global orders. There have been various regional orders before that which have interest in their own right. But in terms of global orders, we've only had one, and if we're going to lose that one, we are therefore moving into somewhat uncharted territory. And it seems to me, as I say, that perhaps you would date it from the 2008 economic crisis, which brought neoliberalism and Western leadership into question, but particularly the 2016 Brexit plus Trump crisis signals, I think, a good potential benchmark date for the end of, or at least the beginning of the end of the long Western domination of global international society. What follows this? It's definitely going to be post-colonial in a fairly serious sense, in that not only the kind of political liberation that happened after the Second World War, but also the economic domination of the West is coming to an end. So partly this new world order will be post-colonial. It's probably not going to be post-Westphalian in the sense that the territorial sovereign state looks well entrenched and not going anywhere. But it's definitely going to be post-Western in the sense that the distribution of power, and also, in a sense, the distribution of cultural and political legitimacy is shifting fairly dramatically. So what I want to do here is to look beyond some of the narrower framings which tend to dominate the literature. I'm not interested at all in a Sino-American a kind of power transition crisis as something which is defining the global order. I'm going to make the case that that's basically now a kind of interregional event, a great power rivalry, but not like a replay of the Cold War, the question about who's running the world. I want to therefore to take a more holistic view to identify a plausible set of assumptions about the key structural features that are likely to dominate the coming decades, both material and ideational, and to expose a bit the rationales behind these assumptions. I suppose the limiting factor in this is that I'm assuming that there will be no wild cards drawn from the deck during the next couple of decades, no kind of global war or great economic collapse or environmental crisis or whatever. Those issues will certainly be part of the background discussion, but I am assuming a degree of continuity that will allow this set of assumptions to be maintained. Okay, so the 7 assumptions. The first one is about the global economy, and here the assumption is that the global market capitalist system, and therefore the shared need for that system to be managed to regulate trade and finance, is going to be maintained, that there will be no general economic collapse back to regional or global levels. That may seem a fairly bold prediction given the economic turbulence that we've been in for the last little while, but the basic rationale behind it is that there isn't really an alternative to this system. It is still the most effective means of producing wealth and power, and most of the existing regimes in most of the major powers are dependent on it to maintain the growth that's necessary to supporting their own domestic legitimacy. There are no, in the ideational sense, there's no obvious alternative to this system. The various ones that have been tried have all failed. And although capitalism is a turbulent system, even a system of permanent revolution in some senses, and it's crisis prone, it's also highly adaptive. So I'm assuming that something like the existing economic order, which is going to maintain a global capitalist economy, will stay with us for the coming decades. The next assumption is about the distribution of power, and this has three components to it. The first is that the distribution of power amongst states will lead to a world with no superpowers. This is an argument well worked out in the book with George that I mentioned. So this will be a pretty novel form. It might not sound novel, but if you think a bit carefully, then it is a world with no superpowers. Okay? That means that all of the kind of what I would call simple polarity theory thinking becomes irrelevant, because polarity theory assumes that there has to be a world with one or more superpowers, and that therefore there's a world politics that happens, in a sense, over competition for control over the system. The world I'm positing is one in which there will be no superpowers, but a number of great powers and regional powers. The polarity theory is not set up to enable us to think about that world, and we haven't been in a world like that before. So this is a novel power structure that we're moving towards. Logically, here I stick my neck out very far because the trends don't seem to look like that, but logically this should produce a more decentered and possibly more regionalized kind of world order, and I'll say more about the details of that later. Whatever it is, it will not be classical multipolarity, and therefore the use of that term to describe it is fundamentally misleading. It won't be classical multipolarity because a system of great powers will not be competing for who dominates the global order. The rationale behind this is basically the spread of wealth and power beyond the West. So for the last couple of centuries, Western domination has been based on a very uneven distribution of wealth and power. That is now beginning to level out. That's what Fareed Zakaria's nice phrase, the rise of the rest, is all about. Right? So the rest are rising, the West isn't going away, we're not looking at a fall of Rome scenario, but the argument here is that there will be no superpowers because no country will be able to either maintain or acquire a sufficient chunk of the wealth and power in the global system to exercise the role of superpower, and also that the role of superpower has become in and of itself illegitimate. The world does not want one hegemonic state. The Americans have had a go at that, made a fairly good mess of it. The American electorate has just voted not to do that anymore by electing an America First president. So this is the power structure, as it were, at the high level that we're looking at. The second assumption here is that because of this diffuse distribution of power, there'll be no global competition as to who is going to run the system, but there may be quite a lot of regional shoving and pushing over boundaries of spheres of influence. And you can see a lot of this already there in the system between China and the US in East Asia. So I classify that as a great power rivalry in a particular region, not a rivalry for global domination. You see it between India and China, in South and Southeast Asia, between Russia and Europe, in the Ukraine and the Baltic states, and you can imagine others as well. But this competition is about spheres and not about the domination of global international society as a whole. And the third assumption is that the diffusion of power is also playing not only among states, but between states and non-state actors. So non-state actors are already acquiring the power to challenge or ally with not just other non-state actors, but with states themselves. And again, there's plenty of evidence of non-state actors being powerful enough to take on states. Think of the global war on terrorism and all of that. But also they are in significant ways allying with states for purposes of aid and development and other such like. So there's a long record of this already, and my assumption is that the distribution of power is going to work in that dimension as well, so that the emerging world order will have more non-state actors playing important roles in it. And these will be both civil society actors and uncivil society actors, by which I mean mafias and terrorists and such like. Assumption 3 is about the nature of great powers. And this is a rather gloomy assumption, but I think the evidence bears it out, that the set of great powers that we're going to have in the decades ahead is going to be inward-looking to the point of being autistic. Right? And therefore, one might expect that the relations amongst them will be prickly, be action over reaction type relations, and will make trust building quite difficult. And I think there are two different sets of reasons as to why the set of emerging great powers will be autistic. The old great powers, mainly the Western powers and Japan, are pretty worn out. They are losing the will to lead. They have their own domestic difficulties, again, as we see with the Brexit vote and the election of Trump. There's a rejection in some senses of neoliberal capitalism in its very core. Right? So these countries are going to go through a period of being pretty inward-looking. They have lost much of the will to exercise power, and they no longer have anything like either the legitimacy or the relative material resources to exercise global dominating power. The rising powers, I'm thinking